He is a frets of frets. Jacob is a frets. He is a frets of frets.
Are we supposed
Jacob
to,
is a
chime in?
frets.
He is a frets.
Jacob frets, sings us songs each day.
Oh, man.
He is a frets. And you can do that at home if you want.
If you want
for
to.
each of the fretzes. So Hazel is a frets, etc., etc. Welcome to Prairie Alliance Church.
And
Live
thanks, Nathan,
stream.
for pulling that out of nowhere.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of that this morning. It's
gonna be
because,
different.
well, we are going to get into our next section of Mark, thanks to Kevin, as he leads us through the story of the vineyard. We're going to be meandering a little bit before we get there, and we really decided that it's not best at this stage, although we might do it later on, to pretend that this is a normal church service. It is myself and Chris and Kevin sitting in an empty gym with a few cameramen and some tech folks. So we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction and still give you the information you might need about what's happening in our church life. We'll talk a little bit about the different responses to what's happening here with this pandemic, and then we'll get into the text. So why don't I pray, and then we'll continue this morning together. Father, we thank you for your sovereignty and your control. We thank you for your attention in the details of our lives. And you're aware of the different fears that we have. You're aware of every emotional response to what's happening here on this planet that you've created. And it hasn't moved out of your hand yet, nor will it. So as we dive into the truth about who you are, about who you're still calling us to be, would you, in a way that's really new for us, in the context that we're in our homes or wherever we are, minister to us the way that you delight to do every Sunday here in this church. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So there were some things on the church calendar that still are on the church calendar, but it's such a fluid situation that really your best bet with baptism classes, soul care, the AGM, and other things that are going on is to make sure you watch social media, our different feeds, but also if you haven't yet, subscribe to this YouTube channel and go to our website. This is probably the most important one, and sign up for our email. That's the quickest way we have of reaching everyone really specifically. Some of the things on social media are obviously going to be geared to the public at large, but the things in that email will be really for people that are here and attending PAC. So you'll want to do that, as well as with offering. That was just a little producer Owen here. Should we give a hand for producer Owen?
Let's give a hand for Owen.
Producer Owen. Owenstein. That was a rambunctious hand. Thank you, Kevin.
I was late on that one.
You were late on that one. That's
Sorry,
okay.
Owen.
That's okay. Owen left. Owen has left the building. Don't blame him. One more thing to do. Normally, before we get into some of the content I want to share with you this morning, is with offering. Normally, of course, we do offering here as a sign of worship. And as I looked at it this week, anticipating some of the shifts that our church was going to have to make, the breakdown of offering is usually about 1/3 happens with our direct deposit. And then the other 2/3 comes in on a Sunday morning, either between the buckets or the debit machine. So that's a lot of people who regularly give at PAC that aren't going to have those avenues anymore. But on our website, if you want to stay faithful with that and continue to bless God with your tithe and support the church, then you just do that simply online or come through during the week. At least that's a viable option at this stage. I think I covered all the details of what I need to cover. Now we can move into things that people are feeling.
Here we go.
You're feeling cold. You're feeling cold.
No, I'm fine.
Good.
Don't want to get carried away.
All right.
I'm fine.
Let's talk about the virus and how we're all feeling about that. We all being us three. Some of the things that have come to your mind, some of the places where you've gone, maybe in your skepticism or in your fear. I can kick things off with a couple of the thoughts that I've had. One of the places that I go to pretty regularly, and I think it's okay because it's one of the Psalms that God has, that God didn't do it, but it comes up lots in the New Testament, and it's Psalm 2. And Psalm 2, the gist of it basically starts out with, why do the nations rage? The people work with their foolish plans, and they basically pretend they have more control than they do. And the people who are in authority are always in a place of thinking they have more control than they do. But then something happens, and it's clear how out of control things are. And in the midst of this psalm where people are exerting control forcefully, trying to make things seem like we're more in control than we are, or else for some it feels like it's totally out of control. The response of God, the one who's really on the throne, is to laugh.
Wow.
Now that can seem a little bit cynical, maybe a little bit cold,
Yeah.
but I don't feel it that way. There's a reassurance that somebody can try to give you where
Yeah.
you secretly feel like they're scared,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But when somebody's chuckling on the throne and is implying that they are as in control as they always were, whether it's persecution the church is facing or exile or some kind of disorientation or fear, this image to me of our Heavenly Father chuckling to himself, I can't think of anything that he would say after hearing that warm chuckle
Yeah.
that would be any more reassuring than that laugh. So I've gone to that text, as many Christians in the New Testament have, when they're facing something that's scaring them or that has them worried. What about you, Chris? What's
Oh,
been
yeah.
some of your
Well,
thought
that's funny you're
process?
talking about laughing. I mean, I wasn't really thinking about this, but just like, I don't know if you've ever got to that place where something's just been out of your hands so much that you just almost have to laugh. And you just like,
Right.
you almost chuckle to yourself. You're like, you know what, at this point, there's some of that. But I mean, but for me, mostly, I guess there's lots to think about. Everybody's thinking about different things with everything going on. But I've been thinking about fear, obviously, quite a bit, and faith, kind of those two things, which are kind of maybe on different ends of the spectrum. But I also thought, like, oh, they're so different, but I also thought how similar they are. So I think if you think about fear and if you think about faith, they kind of have this basic root principle in common. And I think one thing that's similar between them is that they both are expecting something to happen that hasn't happened yet.
Okay, right.
So they both are kind of waiting or expecting that something's going to happen that hasn't happened yet. I mean, the slight difference, obviously, between the two is faith is, is believing that something bad that hasn't happened is going to happen, and did I say fear? Or
No, you said faith.
I said faith.
No.
Faith. So yeah,
said fear.
sorry, we got that wrong. Fear is believing that something bad that hasn't happened is going to happen. Fear is kind of believing that there's something bad that's going to happen, and then the faith part is the opposite, is believing that something good that hasn't happened is going to happen. So it's just interesting to me. I guess I've been thinking about that a lot, and I've been thinking about Hebrews 11, and faith is this substance that's unseen, and it's hoping for things that are to come. So hope, faith, those kinds of things. But kind of in all of that, myself personally, I've just been thinking about, what would Jesus be thinking about in times like this? And it's similar to what you kind of alluded to there, is he's not really worried. And he was going to comfort those in need, and he's going to touch and heal and
Right.
go move and help people who are feeling oppressed or filled with anxiety. But he himself is not worried, and so I'm just trying to live, I guess, in that mindset, same mindset as Christ Jesus, not being worried, but still doing everything I need to do to being able to be a help to other people. And so that's the challenge, I think, and definitely in a time like this. And so, just kind of resting on this last point for me is, no matter what happens for me, whether whether I live or if I die, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. And that to me is, I guess, kind of a place where I can, at the end of the day, have some peace.
That's good. The posture that comes before either expressing your fear, feeling your fear, or moving into a place of faith is a great way to see ourselves, because you almost wish you get to choose, but sometimes it feels like you don't. Right? You just move into the fear,
Yeah.
and not the faith.
Yeah.
So we're in a place where maybe it's hard to choose to experience faith, but to keep coming back to those things that help you feel faith, to be close to God,
Yeah.
so that it becomes more
that's
natural.
so good. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
strange too that fear is contagious, right? We've heard this for the last couple weeks. What if faith was contagious? What if there's something unique about this season where fear is so everywhere that the people who have faith and trust, people who are settled down and aren't panicking, still being wise and all those things, what if there was a climate where faith was actually as contagious as fear? Then we'd have a chance to really see the kingdom advance even in a scary time. That's good. Chris, Kevin, how have you been processing?
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, Chris, when you mentioned that last point about whatever happens, you're okay. That really resonates with a quote that I read years ago from C.S. Lewis. And I try to pass this off as my own, but I'm nowhere near this smart. But he wrote this in a letter to someone, and he sort of set up his own sort of little parable, maybe. He said, 2 men had to cross a dangerous bridge, and the first convinced himself that it would bear them, and he called this conviction faith. The second said, whether it breaks or holds, whether I die here or somewhere else, I'm equally in God's good hands. And the bridge did break, and they were both killed. And the second man's faith was not disappointed, but the first man's was. So I've been trying to live with that big picture sense of faith and confidence. But the challenge for me is there are a few particulars as I look at this virus. I'm not alarmist at all, but I am also a diabetic, and I have asthma, so that puts me at a higher risk category than some. And I'm recently in a context where my family, who I love dearly, is spread across 4 locations in 3 provinces, where last year we were all together. And I have a mom who I love dearly, who's older and whose health is not fantastic. There's some risk factors there that are just kind of this underlying current for me as I seek to hold on to that deeper faith. So in the last couple of days, I just turned back to Psalm 46 that tells us that God is our refuge and our strength. And that phrase, an ever-present help in trouble. So even while the mountains are falling into the heart of the sea and the waters are foaming, God is ever-present in the midst of that. And so we can be still. We can know that he's God, that he's not threatened by what's going on, and he'll carry us through.
Yeah. That's good. You guys getting all these emails from every company you've ever given your email to?
Oh, man.
Yeah. So I'm like Enterprise, Marriott, places like I bought lotion once. It's like suddenly
How we're responding to the COVID-19 virus.
Lotion supply will continue, Nathan. I'm like, oh, thank goodness.
Those one-time
purchase. Keep this cheeks rosy. But they all have this response to the virus, right? And here's what they're doing. And it struck me that Jesus hasn't had to send an email. That he didn't have to adjust anything that he was going to do. And in the West Park Chapel in high school on Wednesday, we talked about Jesus' response to people when they're at the peak moments of their life is the same as when they're bottoming out. His response is always, come to me. Come as close as you can. And again, that's like really rich because we're into the social distancing time, right?
Right.
So you can still, in the midst of being stuck away from your church family, again, because life is slowing down for so many people in certain ways, you actually have time that you maybe didn't have to draw near to him in a new way. So he hasn't changed. He didn't send out an email letting you know his new policies. He's still saying, come to me. And I would say to our church family, maybe even learn how to come to him better than you knew how to before. Maybe it's the fear propelling you a little bit, which is perfectly okay, because as you move closer to him and feel his love, that fear is going to dial down. But if there is an opportunity to season some of this, it is for you and for us to experience Jesus differently when we do feel like we're out of control. Because the truth is, we always are.
Yeah.
Right? There's this thin veneer of control that we live in, but man, how quickly it just punctures, right? It just goes so fast.
Yeah.
And we experiencing that in our families. Somebody gets ill, or some other situation gets out of our hands. But for a whole world to feel that this way is pushing us in different ways to think about life and death and significance in different ways. So in all that, Jesus says, come to me.
You say all that, but I think there's something behind. Is that, something like you sound.
I was
It's a really
busted. Yeah,
bold statement. I was like, what are you smuggling
busted.
out of here
That
today?
was-
A bold statement from a guy who's hoarding toilet paper.
Yeah. Shoot. That was really poorly
I was
timed.
like, this is a really great quote. I'm
I was going to use it as Kleenex, I think, for when
Okay,
for when you
know
tear
what?
up
We'll give
later.
Dave, I'll leave that.
Huh.
We'll give that back to Dave.
Dave brought it from home.
I feel like he's monitoring the supply.
Oh, Dave Britton.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Find the segue. Find the segue.
Find the segue.
No, I
Thank
had
you,
it.
Chris.
I had it. We're
Thank you,
going to
Chris.
talk about Jeremiah before we transition into what Kevin has for us. Jeremiah is interesting because the first part of Jeremiah, he's warning the nation of Israel that you guys better sharpen up. You better start following God or else something bad's going to happen. They don't listen. Something bad happens. They go into exile. So they're dislocated from their home. They're, certainly, to use like a phrase that would resonate with us, all the patterns that sustain them and all the habits, all the hobbies, all the rhythms of life are totally disrupted. And they're facing this new unknown reality called exile. And when that happens, the prophet Jeremiah changes his tune a little bit. He goes from being confrontational to really being comforting. And if you want to read Jeremiah 29 at home, and I would encourage you to do that, I won't go through it here, you'll see things like live as if you have a future. Live for the good of the city you're in. Don't forget about God. Stay on mission. Plant a garden. Take care of your kids. Be fruitful and multiply. Like still live, because I'm still God, and I have a future for you. It's super rich to remember that stuff personally, but also for us as a church, because it's different like this. Doesn't mean we should be any less on mission. So rather than spend this whole hour talking about the virus and the situation that we're in, we felt it's really important to stay sharp on mission, to, even though we're in exile, so to speak, and we're dislocated, to go into the text that we were planning to as a church body together and see what God has for us there. And as we've talked about it with Kevin, we see that there is something for this unique situation, but also something just timeless. So with that, why don't you take us into this morning's sermon?
Yeah, for sure. You're talking about exile there, and it feels like it sort of sets me up to make some quip about our move to Manitoba as a kind of exile, as we're
Hey now.
living among a strange people, a strange land with strange new foods.
You came from the land of milk and honey. Is
Well,
is
yeah,
or
clearly.
Okay.
The land of living skies. But yeah, you know, actually for our family, having just moved to Portage 2 or 3 months ago, there's so much that's new, and we've had friends following us along for all of this, right? Following the journey, and they've been really supportive of us, but they also have been sort of poking fun along the way too. So about a month ago, someone was talking with me, and he was commending the way that our family was following God into what God was leading us to. He said, even if it means that you have to live in Manitoba.
Now, just to be clear, these friends are from Saskatchewan, like, and it's Briarcrest largely, which is like even balder prairie than here.
Yes, promised land, promised land.
Huh. All right, just for context.
Always.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, this, you know, you guys probably get that kind of response from people. This was kind of my first time as a Manitoba resident, and something struck me about that. And as I thought about it afterwards, I realized part of the issue, right, that they're talking about how I have to live here, and it just became really clear to me in a moment that this isn't a have to for me. That this is a get to. Right? That I get to
Amen.
be.
Amen.
Yeah, you get to be thrown to the wolves here in this live service.
Yes.
You're a privileged man.
Yeah, something like that.
Hashtag blessed.
But really, that I get to be a part of this church, that I get to be a part of the team that's here, that I get to tap into the vision that's here. Every week, there's points where I go, man, I can't believe that I get to be here and be doing this stuff. So I've got people kind of jokingly talking about the have to, and I'm in the midst of a pretty thick get to, right? Blessing and fruitfulness. But what I've thought about as I've looked at this text that we're looking at today, I've realized that there's some dangers that come our way when you're living in the midst of a lot of blessing and abundance. There's some things that you have to be careful about. And it comes up a bit in this text. So we're in Mark 12, verses 1 to 12. And I think those texts, we're just going to read it through, I think. And
maybe as you turn there, let's just live a little bit in how rich we do have it here at Prairie Alliance Church, because I think we can kind of forget about that. And when we forget about how richly we've been blessed, maybe that's when the danger can come up a little bit more.
Yeah.
For us, but we have an abundance of people that are on mission. Mm-hmm. We have generous provision for resources. We have a unique call to bless this town. And when somebody from the outside like Kevin comes with fresh eyes and very quickly dives in and invests and feels that it's special, I think as a church, it's just important for us to be glad, first of all, that, yeah, we are part of something pretty unique, something bigger than us, something that feels really rich, and we get to be here. Even as we rejoice in that, though, let's tune our ears here as we move into the text to wonder, what might the shadow side of that be? What places do we need to worry about when we sit in our place of blessing and privilege?
Cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's hear these words from Jesus. So Jesus has been talking with the authorities, the chief priests and some of the teachers of the law. There's this conflict that Nathan led us into. Pay attention, Nathan. We're online.
Just freaking Chris
He
out.
always drinks my water.
Drink his water.
Yeah.
But there's been this tension that he's had with the chief priests and the teachers of the law. And then this is what we have in Mark 12. He then began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and went away on a journey. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. But they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to them, and they struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. He sent still another, and that one they killed. He sent many others. Some of them they beat, others they killed. So he had one left to send, a son whom he loved. And he sent him last of all, saying, "They'll respect my son." But the tenants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. So what then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Haven't you read this scripture? The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. The Lord has done this, and it's marvelous in our eyes. And then they looked for a way to arrest him because they knew he'd spoken the parable against them. But they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away. So Jesus begins this parable, and he sets up this really familiar setting. It's really common in Jesus' day throughout the Roman Empire to have landlords establish a vineyard or a farm of some type and then to leave it in the care of tenants and to go off to their other region. So this is a really common feature of the land. And truly, the establishment of something like a vineyard is a major undertaking. Right? As you're preparing the soil, as you're choosing the vines, as you're waiting probably 4 years for that to yield any kind of a harvest. There's this major investment. And the text here makes it clear that this owner is doing everything that he needs to make this thing flourish. He's building the wall. He's providing a watchtower to check for any trouble that would be on the horizon. He's got the wine press there, and he leaves it in the care of the tenants. This is a familiar setting. And it's also the picture that we see over and over again in the Old Testament about God's relationship with his people, right? We see this picture over and over again of God being this rich owner who establishes this vineyard, and Isaiah 5 brings that out really, really clearly.
It's a genius story, and it's typical Jesus, where he can tell a story that fits the moment just perfectly, and everyone's convicted, and like, he's talking about me and I'm ticked, or he's talking about me and I'm convicted and I have a soft heart, or else he can tell a story and everyone's like, what are you talking about? And like 2 years later, they're like, oh.
Yeah.
But in this particular one, this is really pointed because of the Isaiah imagery that they would know about, because of the way that the vineyard is a symbol through Israelites' history of who they are, that this is an indictment. Something has gone horribly wrong here.
Yeah, so we have this thing set up, and it's as we would expect. And the next text talks about how at harvest time he sends a servant to collect some of the fruit. This is the arrangement. Usually 25% of the harvest would go back to the owner. So it's everything that we would expect, and that's where the story turns for us, right?
It takes a pretty dark turn.
Yeah, like crazy dark, right? So, and the first one maybe not so much, but the servant, rather than being received, he's seized and beaten and sent away empty-handed. Now, we actually do know there's like documentation from around the time of Jesus that you'd have disputes between owners and tenants at times, where tenants would withhold some of the stuff, and then an agent would be sent to them, and sometimes a new petition would be presented by the...
So the process is all pretty, it's making sense the way Jesus is telling the story.
It's making sense, but there's tension there, but I don't think we expect to see exactly what happens, right? That we have the seized servant, and so then the owner sends a second servant.
Right.
And this one, we're told, is struck in the head. And there's an escalation of the violence. So maybe it takes this guy longer before he gets back home because he's had to heal up. And then the owner sends a third servant, and this one doesn't come home, right? This one they kill. And so there's this level of crazy with the tenants that there's this escalating violence and resistance to what it is they're supposed to be doing. But that's matched by another level of crazy. And I think we see that in the owner's like patience and persistence, right? That he just keeps sending more people.
That's good.
He keeps giving them another chance. And you can maybe imagine what it's like if you're servant number 8, right? And
going down the line. They're all lined up.
You're just 4. Like, take him. Take him. I'm busy. I can't go check.
But again, as Jesus is telling this story, it's not just a story. He's talking about the relationship of God and his people. And he's bringing out this point, right? That God has been sending his servants to collect the fruit of the vineyard. He's been sending prophets to his people all the way through. And they've been resisting them and mistreating them. And God just patiently and persistently keeps opening the door and keeps offering it. And one commentator I was reading this week, he described this as the blessed idiocy of grace, which I think is a pretty, I mean, it's a pretty powerful kind of a thought.
Well, that's good, because you imagine the owner talking this over with other owners. And them going, really? Like how stupid are you going to be about this? Like they have already shown you who they are. They've already shown you what their intentions are.
Don't send your
Don't do it. Don't do it. And the idiocy of grace is, it feels like idiocy until you're on the receiving end of it. And then you're going, thank you, God, that I got this many chances. Thank you that you're this open-hearted to me. And ultimately, as the story unfolds, there's even more to be thankful for.
So there's been all of these appeals, and it kind of culminates in the story with one ultimate appeal. The text says that the man has one left that he can send, an only son, a beloved son. There's this potency to this description, right? And it's pretty clear to us who we're talking about.
Do you know who we're talking about, Chris?
John the Baptist?
No. Try again. Try again.
Pastor Chris.
You need to get somebody else here next week.
Owen? Yeah, Lydia's on standby for next week.
I'm going to go with Jesus.
Yes.
Bible school answer.
Yes.
Okay.
Ding, 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 ding. I can only imagine the special effects that are happening on the screen right now. That's Chris. It's a jackpot.
So the owner has one left to send, this son, and he says in the text, they will respect my son. Because the son is not just like another servant. The son comes with the full authority of the father.
Which doesn't make sense in that moment, right? It's still in the story saying it. Well, then I'm going to send my son. That doesn't make sense.
Right?
It's just, Like you talked about crazy, yeah.
Yeah, there's a sense, why would you think there would be any
Yeah.
difference in this case? And yet there's this ultimate extension of grace. I'm going to send one final and ultimate and authoritative appeal.
Wow.
It's my son. But they don't listen, right? They in fact become more emboldened. And when they see the son coming, they say, this is the heir. They recognize him. This is the heir. Let's kill him and take the inheritance. They're wanting to keep the vineyard for themselves. They're trying to get rid of the son and keep the vineyard for themselves.
Last week, I had mentioned that made no sense, right? To think, oh, here comes the son, let's kill him. Then we get to keep it because the old man won't care, which is ridiculous. I mean, if you kill somebody's son, they're going to probably care even more. But you were saying there is actually other ways of seeing that where their actions might make sense.
Yeah, as people have tried to figure out what is that about. And so there's a few suggestions that have come forward. Some have pointed to some legal evidence that would say that in certain instances, if an owner fails to claim a harvest for a number of years, maybe 3 or 4 years, then it's like he's leaving the land free to be claimed by others. So some have looked to that and have tried to, it's suggested that could be
similar
something
to
in play.
squatters' rights. Is that right? No?
I'm not sure. What you're familiar with squatters'
I think
rights?
ask Sally
You've done a lot of work
Sally
on,
and Corey will
a lot of
flesh
work
it out
on
for
squatters'
you.
rights.
Yeah, you can talk to your
Is that how
sister
you got
about
your
it.
house? I just noticed Kevin and I are wearing matching socks. I don't know if
Hey.
Wow.
that's a good sign, I think.
Yeah.
Unless you
They
stole
are
socks from me.
Exactly the same.
So that's one possible, I'm just going to dig
Yeah, you
right
just
to
keep
it. There
going.
you go.
So the scenario is they're not claiming the harvest, therefore.
Yeah. But clearly that's not what's going on in this situation,
Right,
right?
yeah,
He's
yeah.
trying to get the harvest there.
Yeah.
Others have said, well, perhaps the farmers assumed that the father was dead, and that's why the son is now coming. So if we deal with the son, we don't have to worry about the father now. We just deal with the son, and the vineyard can be ours. So people have looked at a few
Interesting,
different ways
yeah.
of trying to understand that.
Yeah.
But at its heart, I think what we see is we're not seeing logic here. We're just seeing greed.
Yeah.
Right? We're just seeing this self-focus where there's something that they want. They got something good. They want to hold on to it. And that self-focus clouds everything else, and they will do anything that they have to in order to hold on to the good that they perceive as theirs.
As you're talking, I'm reminded about the parable of the prodigal son. And or it's really prodigal father, but there is a level of craziness there of the father's grace as well. But the interesting thing about the two sons is that they both want the father out of the way so they can have the vineyard, or in this case, it would be his inheritance. And so the one is saying, I'm wishing him dead now, and the other one is like just kind of waiting it out, but really just doesn't want the father, just wants the inheritance. Anyways, just the similar parallel was interesting to me, just as you're talking now.
Yeah.
It would be beyond the scope of what we're doing this morning, but to look at Jesus' parables and how many of them are aimed at exposing greed and self-interest in us that comes because we don't trust the Father. I suspect that you would see that pattern in a lot of these parables.
Yeah.
And you certainly see it here, where regardless of what's happening, it's precisely legally, like you said, Kevin, it is about greed and self-interest. And so we've kind of left it hanging where the son dies.
So
does
they
the father do?
kill the son.
Yeah.
Which, right, Jesus is talking to people he's in conflict with. He's indicating what's about to happen in a matter of days. Jesus is fully aware of what's about to happen. But
You're talking crucifixion.
Yeah, the crucifixion, which we're just days away.
Good one.
Thanks.
Which we're just days away from there, and the farmers throw the body out of the vineyard. So the ultimate indignity is just left in shame and humiliation.
No burial, no.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
Just out there.
And so Jesus then in parable land says to the people he's listening to, what then will the owner of the vineyard do? And when Matthew tells the story, the crowd actually answers back and says, he will bring those wretches to a wretched end.
Right.
It's just so obvious that something has to change, right?
Yeah.
And what we see is that this exceeding patience, gives way to judgment. There's this judgment where those tenants are judged, they're destroyed, Mark says, and then the vineyard is given to others. who will produce its fruit and will give back to the owner that which he is due.
It's probably hard to feel the sense of judgment when you're not in the room. So if you were to look at the camera and say,
Yeah.
I will bring you wretches to a wretched end, that might help.
Would it?
Yeah, right there.
I don't think I'm going to do that.
I
No,
will.
as much as you want me to, I don't think I'm going to do that.
Because, I mean, Chris, you got to make this stuff come alive.
Yeah, make it really make people experience it.
Not gonna do
I think
it.
it was the crowd that was
Well, you could-
was responding. Like
could play
they
the-
were the
you
ones
could play
saying
the part of the
they were
crowd.
the ones pronouncing the judgment. But I will wave my finger
Okay,
angrily.
so if people
at
at-
people
if-
wherever crowd
If
is.
people at home said,
That's right.
that's
they
right.
can say to the
right.
TV.
So I would have actually got
Yeah.
the
On the
podcast
count of
wrong.
three.
So,
Yeah.
On the count of three,
Yeah.
I will
bring
bring you
it in.
wretches to a wretched end, which might be more true than we know.
So yeah, clearly this is a picture of what's happening in the kingdom. I'm just pushing
Yeah,
ahead,
that's
man.
good.
I'm
Yeah.
pushing ahead. This is a picture of this massive change that's happening in the kingdom, where the vineyard, God's vineyard, this work that He's cared for and provided for, there's this shift that's happening within where some are being displaced, and there's this new work
Yeah.
that's about to come
Yeah.
up. And there's the verse from Psalm 127 that he refers to about the stone that was rejected by the workers has become the capstone. So the rejected son,
Yeah.
right, in the vineyard, this is the rejected stone.
Yeah.
That it had been rejected for the building of the temple. There's Psalm 127 that seems to be talking about God's temple being built. It was put to the side. That rejected stone actually becomes the centerpiece of what God is doing. And Jesus is saying, this is all playing on in real time with us here, right here and now. Even though I'm the rejected one, I'm about to become the center point of this new work of God, and the new people of God is forming.
And that takes us basically through to the end of the chapter.
Yeah.
And we've got a good sense of what it meant then, what Jesus did in that context, the response of the people He was saying it to, and what happens in the next week. But there's richness there for us as we reflect on what we've been given and what our call is.
Yeah.
And so let's turn a corner a bit and talk about what this text is going to call each of us to.
Yeah. Well, I think every time that I've read this text, it's really natural, to see it in that particular historical context and to just sort of like leave it there. You can tie it off with a bow and, oh, that's nice and has historical relevance. But what's been digging at me in the last couple weeks as I've been reflecting on this text is that this is really our story too, right? We show up in this story. We show up as those whom the vineyard is given to in replacement of the former tenants.
Yeah, because there's a warning there.
Yeah, there's two things there. I think there's grace there.
Yeah.
We need to realize it's amazing grace that we have been invited in to this rich work of God, that we would be invited to work the ground and to be a part of fruitfulness and abundance. That's profound grace in any of our lives. But there's an edge to that grace, right? That you're mentioning, that there is a task before us. There's an expectation of us. The vineyard is given to those who will produce its fruit. And so there's this task that's there. And what I've been thinking about in the last couple of weeks is the danger that's before us can be the danger that we see in play maybe with the original tenants. That we would think that we could just be in the midst of all this richness and abundance and just keep it all to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we could somehow relegate Jesus or push Jesus off to the side somehow, and the inheritance could be ours. We could just enjoy all this richness and all this fruit and just keep it to ourselves and for ourselves.
Wow. That language that you're sharing, I remember when we were dreaming about, well, we didn't even think about planting a church or doing a multi-site at the time, but we were reveling in what God was doing in this atmosphere. And with our families, with like everything that was going on, this amazing things that we were just eating the fruit of what God was doing, and at this beautiful shift, and I don't even know how it came, but it was like we've got to give this away. It's too good just for us. And that was, I just remember being the pathway to where can we share it? What can we do? And I love where we're going with that, with our prayer on multi-site, is like just finding places that are under-churched and just going to share fruit. Plant a vineyard, or however you want to say it.
Yeah.
Seems to me like blessedness can turn so easily into entitlement.
Yeah.
And then you start to get blinded to what you've been blessed with. So you get something and you feel blessed, but then, wow, it's mine. And don't mess with it. Don't introduce anything new. So in our context, perhaps one of the visiting servants is a new way to experience God, or some other sort of change that we don't like, but we're entitled to having it our way. And God's saying, I didn't give it to you so that you could hoard it or feel entitled to it or guard it. Your preferences are starting to mean too much to you. You're owning this the wrong way. This is not a container for you to own. This is a conduit for you to hold. And the blessings that I'm giving you need to flow through. So when I see how you're leading us into this, that they're missing why they were given the vineyard in the first place.
Yeah.
So it would bear fruit. They're just wanting to hold it. The story is
good.
profound because it can be as big as the Adam and Eve story. People are put in the garden and they're told to steward creation and take care of it. Then there's the vineyard, which kind of narrows it a bit, Israel's unique role. And then there's the unique role of our church, but also in our homes. So the vineyard, so to speak, of our home, of our family, of our job, the things that we're to tend and steward for the blessing of other people. When we hoard those things, it just goes sideways with violent images.
Yeah. Well, and you helped us see last week, in the message last week, that Jesus has this authority, and that it's not just a provisional, it's not just an abstract idea of authority, that if we resist that authority, then we're going to break ourselves on him. And I think when we see God's intent for his people, for his vineyard, for his temple, the intent is that this would be a source of blessing for the world, blessing for the nations. Tamara helped us see that 2 weeks ago in her message. And so, as soon as we turn inward, as soon as we're just trying to hold that to ourselves, then we're standing against the authority and the intent of Jesus. It was never intended to be hoarded.
Yeah.
And it's not going to end well.
Yeah.
If we maintain that kind of a posture, it's not going to end well.
So when we say things like hoarding and keeping it to ourselves, and there's this violent imagery, it's hard for us to see ourselves in it. Although hoarding in this particular season,
Hard to see, Nathan.
Where's that toilet paper, Nate?
No,
Where's that toilet paper?
Where did it go?
I gave it
I
to
don't
you.
think so.
Yes.
Anyway.
You enjoy.
Prove it.
You enjoy. It's like sandpaper, that stuff. The images aren't necessarily easy for us to see ourselves in, so why don't we bring it into our own lives? Where are you tempted to turn inward? Where are you tempted to keep something or be safe with something that God intended for you to give away?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely money is a thing.
I'd have guessed it was money for you, probably.
It's in my DNA.
Yeah.
It's the Mennonite genes that are causing me to
It's the homemade
to
genes
worry
to save
about
money. Yeah. You gotta get your mom to stop making your pants. Spend
It's a heck of a deal.
Spend a few bucks, Caleb.
Yeah, and then I'm worry free, right? My mom making my pants. But I mean, like even in being a generous person, in all that, I love to give, but there at what extent are you, like, where's the line where you just say that's enough or that's too much, and just that fear of what if God won't meet my needs of what I need, and it is that control of. So I think I need to have control of of this, but it is all just an illusion of control, because we've all been in places where we didn't have enough, and yes, there's been times where those happen, but it's a challenge. I think money's up there for sure as one of those things that can be.
Yeah. Maybe as we continue this way, it's helpful for us and for you to think that about the places where God has actually sent you a servant already. So you've been convicted about this particular thing, and you've already said no. And we see that in our lives. It gets easier to say no.
Yeah.
And pretty soon you're saying no at a level that is almost obnoxiously violent to God's conviction of you. And at some point, it's taken from you. So that helps me as I think about what my vineyard might be, to imagine like the sequences of no's that I've gone through. Anyway, Kevin, where have the servants come and you've
You seem to know a lot
struck
about
'em on the
vineyards
head?
before when you're talking about digging out the field and
Yeah,
you
that's
have so much
impressive.
knowledge
That's
about
good.
vineyards.
We need a pastor here who has
What's going on?
agricultural knowledge.
Oh, yeah,
Chris
yeah,
is
that's
in-
that's what I've been brought in
Saskatchewan.
here for.
Tell us more about the vineyard.
You know, so I find myself addressed in this passage, again, having talked about how this is a get-to place for me, not a have-to place. It would just be easy to give in to this kind of self-focus where, well, man, my son's got a great school and there's a fantastic youth group here that he's a part of, and my wife's making really good friends, and we come to a huddle on a Sunday morning and we're hearing words from the Lord for us and we're enjoying the worship that's here, and to just eat it all. There's just this core selfishness that would say, yeah, that's enough. Like, and life is busy enough and we're giving enough energy to different things that we're to just sort of keep it at that level. Yeah, that's the critique for me. And there could be a justification on our part as well that, well, we're the new people here, right? It is enough for us to just get used to this place, and that would keep our focus inward rather than thinking about our new neighbors and thinking about the people that we're in line with at Walmart, hoarding toilet paper, and whatever it might be. But yeah, I find myself critiqued just on that potential to just have that self-focus, that this is about me and my favorites and making sure that we have what we want. And love being a part of a church that's doing good things out there. Just don't really want to invest any more in that than I have to.
Yeah. Personal cost, risk.
Yeah.
If there is a side to this parable where the people hearing it are like, oh, this actually makes sense because legally this is what anybody would do. They're well within their rights. Then you've got a cultural norm contrasted with a kingdom norm. And I feel like in my life where I follow culture and make the decisions that any sane man in his mid-40s would make versus the decisions that a kingdom person should make, that's where I protect the vineyard. Something really amusing happened to me and a little bit frightening. We got our Alliance Retiral Fund statements. So I'm looking through these things. I'd hate to think about what shape they're in now after the market crashing. But for the first time in my life, I was like, wow, that's not that far away. My early retirement day is like 2033, something like that. Which I'm not intending to do, but it's just
51?
a weird. I'm like, what? Did I have my age wrong? No, because you can retire at 55. And I'm 43, right? So 12 years from now. So I'm thinking to myself, what do I want to do for those 12 years? Not that that's the finish line, but
The fry truck.
that is the fry truck. That's my escapist thing, to grab the fry truck and go to the Corn and Apple Festival and make a fortune selling fries. The danger is that it's not just comfortable here for our church, it's comfortable for me. Generally beloved by the parishioners at PAC. And they're kind to our family. I have enough to do all sorts of things. I get to travel places. And so why Dauphin? Why lean into the controversy of 1/3 Indigenous? Why try to clarify what exactly we mean by one-touch healing? Why not just kind of cruise, right? Send out a survey, who likes what songs? Let's sing those songs. Send out a survey, how often should house churches really meet? Oh, let's meet that much. And I can probably just kind of settle. So there's already bile that rises in my throat when I say that. I don't ever want to be that person, but you can become that when you get selfish about it. Personally, though, for me, the vineyard would be time, hoarding time and control, God sending messenger after messenger after messenger, and be like, no, I got to sustain this. I got to not. And eventually, he just broke that wall down and opened up our home in a way that just makes time not the sacred thing that it once was. Producer Owen just looked at his watch. I don't know what that means.
Oh.
Does anybody understand?
No.
Looked at his
probably
watch
just
for
has
heaven.
a
11:48.
an
I'm looking at my watch. That's a long time.
What does this
Presuming
mean?
there's anybody left
What does this mean?
watching,
Circle.
we should probably wind it down. So let's wind it down. Kevin, I'll kick it over to you to maybe do your last thoughts, and then Chris will give you little bit, and then I'll land the plane.
Yeah. I think there's a really important posture or focus for us to talk about this, because it does cost something if we're going to live in that way that we're giving. But we have Jesus in another place in the Gospels talking to his followers and calling them, or saying to them that freely you have received, freely give. And I think it's important for us to hold on to that first part of that as well, to recognize the abundance and how much we have been given.
Yeah.
In order to give away. So it's not just about us just draining the well. There's this inflow of what we have received from the Lord that is not meant for us to just hold on to, but to give. So that's probably important that we remember that first part, so that we don't just kill ourselves and become bitter. So that's something I want to carry away from this morning.
What about you, Mr. Kaler?
That's good. I was just thinking about that.
Probably money for you, probably, hey?
What's that?
Money for you again, probably?
Yeah, back to money. I think, I guess a couple things. I love what you guys were both talking about, and just different images that I've had, and it's just about the difference between a lake and a river, and just the trying to be, when the water dries up, and we just become a lake, the water goes stagnant. But allowing the blessings to come to us, see them, and then allow them to flow, being that fresh water. Jesus says, "I am living water. I'll give you a spirit, living water." Now we're following the Spirit. So that's one thing, just that imagery. And then the second thing is just, I guess in this whole text, like Jesus' goal was never self-preservation. So you look at these things and you're like, he knows, he sees the conflict, the issue, and he goes, that's why I'm going. Because I'm going to take it on. And that's a challenge. I was like, okay, but that's what we're called to do. And so my goal, not to be somebody who's so concerned about myself. Self-preservation is not the goal. And so it's pressing into those things to give.
It's great.
My two things, I think, to close. One is to really put a fine point on it for people listening, that on a Sunday morning, when you are convicted and you say no, you're killing the servant. That's not a bad thing the church is doing to you. Why do they talk about money? Why do they talk about time? Why do they talk about house church? Why do they talk about... Because God's given you lots of things for you to use and be a part of and to serve him with. And when you're called into those things, and the harder your reaction negatively probably means you're down on like servant number 7 or 8, right? So if you're kind of going, oh, that's mildly disturbing to me, no, I will not serve. If you're like, you sons of, why are you telling me to give again? You're getting close to killing a really important servant and forfeiting what is around you, because that's what happens. So we would be not being faithful to the text or to our congregation if we just didn't make that crystal clear. For me, well, it'd be that, I suppose. I don't want to kill the servants, but specifically for me, I just need to remember that the more God blesses me, the harder it can be to follow Jesus. As I get more stuff, possessions, relationships, things to protect, things to steward, things to take care of, it's easier to protect them instead of to invest them. And this parable reminds me, calls me powerfully that I need to invest with vulnerability the things that God has given me, this church, the mission that we're on, to not just sit and bask in anything or protect anything, but with vulnerability invest it for the good of the people that don't know how gracious this crazy owner is, that would continue to reach out to us over and over and over and over and call us to himself. That's our church service. We were going to sing "This Is How I Fight My Battles" a cappella.
Feels like I'm
This is how I fight my battles.
No?
This is
Slow or this?
This is how I
This is
fight
how.
my battles. Everyone.
Owen's just like,
This is how I fight my battles.
you out
This
there.
is how. Owens, does this mean more? Does this mean change the key? This is how I fight my battles.
Okay,
I'm
well.
still wrapping up.
We want you to rap, I think.
Give me a.
This is how I fight my battles. anyways,
That's a good wrap.
yeah.
Are we
I
done?
think we got to say thank you for people for joining us.
If there's
I think
anyone
that's-
left, we
yeah.
admire your fortitude, your focus, your resilience.
God bless you.
Grace and peace.
Yeah.